Mr. Berlusconi, you arrived in politics in 1994, you left in 2011, you returned in 2012. Why have you come back?
I've come back because, just as in 1994, my country is in danger, and the danger is that the left will govern the country. We don't have a social democratic left, but a left that has its roots in communist ideology. The party used to be called the Italian Communist Party. Then they changed the name. Nowadays it's called the Democratic Party, but the men in it are the same players.
It's not enough to evoke the spectre of the communists to win elections. Does Silvio Berlusconi have anything new to offer?
We have a comprehensive program which isn't easy to explain quickly, but which
a couple of the main points?
Our program is based on a complete change of direction compared with the economic program by the so-called technocrats who were in power and who caused a disaster. In 13 months, they brought about a fall in consumption, a fall in production, 600,000 more unemployed, and a jobless rate among young people of 37%. They've also caused the public debt to go up, caused stagnation and crisis in many sectors, particularly construction and the car industry, whose sales have fallen to the levels of 33 years ago. What are we offering Italians? We are liberals. We think that the citizen should not be a servant of the state, but that the state should be the servant of the citizen. So we must intervene on behalf of the citizens, above all by reducing taxes. First and foremost, we want to abolish council tax, which was created by this government and which gives Italy the second highest tax on homes in Europe.
But why didn't you use all your years in government to reduce taxes?
Because Italy has two disadvantages compared to other states. The vote in Italy is extremely fragmented. We don't yet have a bipolar system where there's one left and one right, the Democrats and the Republicans. Italians vote for a myriad of small parties. To govern, you need the support of a coalition where there is one big party, the Democrat Party on the left, and the People's Party, that's mine, on the right. But it has to include these small parties, who don't always look towards the interests of the country. Their only concern is their own interests, which boils down in the end to the interests of their petty leaders.
The Northern League is an example.
Yes, there are certain things we haven't been able to do because of the Northern League's veto. When you propose a law, you have to find a compromise with the smaller allies, then you send it to Parliament, where it comes out 450 to 600 days later, completely changed. And if that's not enough, if the opposition objects to one part or even all of it, the proposal can be challenged by the totally Italian anomaly of politicized left-wing magistrates. These magistrates take hold of the proposed law, put it before the Constitutional Court, which isn't balanced either. There are 11 left-wing members and only 4 from the centre-right, which inevitably overturns what has been voted on by Parliament.
Judges work on concrete facts, don't they, without taking a political stance?
No. Judges attack their political adversaries without necessarily having the facts. I was removed from the government in 1994, a travesty for democracy and for those who elected me, with a warrant from the Milan prosecutor who accused me of corruption.
A few years later, I was cleared completely of this accusation and was found not guilty. Now the Milan prosecutor is trying to do the same thing.
Even so, it is shocking to think that we could have a future Prime Minister and former Prime Minister tussling with the judiciary like that.
The real issue is not the Prime Minister tussling with the judiciary, but the judiciary intervening in politics and the citizens' democratic choices by using its power in a political struggle.
So it's all just lies.
I've always been acquitted. I've had 103 accusations. All have been thrown out or lapsed. That is, the magistrates have not been able to prove their accusations over the years and they've been shelved. The result is a figure that will be hard to believe for European citizens who watch television. In 19 years, I have had to spend 450 million euros on consultants and lawyers. It's unbelievable unless you're aware that magistrates are influenced by politics. I'll prove it to you. There's a party that was formed only by left-wing magistrates, expressing their leftist views very clearly, that until a few days ago handled the most sensitive investigations in Italy, like the inquiry into links between the state and the mafia.
But a magistrate who resigns and gets involved in politics is a citizen like any other.
Yes, but he continues to think like a magistrate.
Well, let's say that conflict of interest doesn't only concern magistrates, but also businessmen.
We made a law to deal with conflict of interest, which is still in force. I say this to those who believe that Silvio Berlusconi has used his television channels for politics. No, my channels do not do politics. There's not even a single program in my television history that has attacked the left.
Speaking about conflict of interests doesn't only mean talking about media coverage, but also the past and the here and now of a candidate, whether he's a magistrate or a businessman. And he must be accountable, not only as a magistrate, but also Prime Minister.
I've been under the microscope for 19 years. Magistrates have compiled more than 2 million pages of files on me, and my business activities have been totally cleared. I'm probably Italy's #1 taxpayer. Since I went into politics,
contribuente italiano, da quando sono in campo ho versato 9 miliardi di euro.
I've paid 9 billion euros in tax to the state.
E quindi fino adesso
they've always attacked me.
Sempre di attaccarmi,
but in the end,
ho sempre vinto io.
I've always won.
In 1994, when you stood for the first time, you announced liberal reforms based on the policies of Reagan and Thatcher. But the results of those reforms aren't very visible today.
No, perché non è stata possibile fare.
That's because it wasn't possible to introduce a real liberal revolution as I wanted.
What was missing?
We were missing the instrument that would have allowed us to bring it about. The Italian government does not have the instruments to govern that other Western democracies have. Unless we change the constitution, Italy will remain ungovernable. We have a few problems, but Italy is rich. We live well. We're the second most solid economy in Europe.
With youth unemployment at 37.5%, a rich country with so many unemployed certainly has a problem. It's not so rich.
Yes, but because the so-called technocrat government has not made good reforms, and they've made hiring more difficult.
But the figures are not just the work of a temporary technocrat government.
As far as I'm concerned, my government created 1.5 million jobs. In my opinion, you can't touch that. I gave 1.5 million people in Italy a job.
But the statistics are still negative.
Listen, with me, unemployment fell to 7%. With the technocrat government, it rose to 11.1%.
It's the European average. We moved towards the European average, 10.6, 10.7%.
We are above the European average. We have more unemployed here than in the rest of Europe. I've included in our manifesto a measure to help businesses that could take on young people without paying tax.
L'impresa pagherà al nuovo collaboratore assunto sarà esattamente quello che il nuovo collaboratore assunto
That is, what the employee gets from the employer is 100% of what they earn,
rispetto al costo dell'impresa.
And not 50% as it is today because of the fiscal surcharge.
In più, rispetto alle assunzioni in nero che purtroppo nell'economia italiana esistono ancora.
As for jobs on the black market, and they still make up a big chunk of the Italian economy, our system could help to limit that, because companies could deduct the costs for these new staff and so pay less tax.
How are you going to overcome the black economy? It is a national priority, a real emergency. What do you propose?
The underground economy is an old story that you can defeat in one way, by decreasing fiscal pressure. That's our target. We didn't put up taxes in almost 10 years of government.
Nor did you lower them.
That's because of the Italian situation, as I said, that didn't allow us to introduce labour reforms and tax reforms that would go some way towards bringing the underground economy into the open.
Do you have any regrets about your time as Prime Minister? Could you have done anything more, anything differently?
No. I believe not. That would have been almost impossible. I don't think I made any mistakes.
None?
Just one. I wasn't able to convince Italians to give me an absolute majority.
And nothing else?
Not at all. I did a great job, better than all those before me, and despite all the difficulties. I did some admirable things.
Who is Silvio Berlusconi's principal political enemy these days? Who do you see as your true opponent?
I don't know of any enemies. I just have competitors, or as you say, opponents. And it's definitely the leader of the Democratic Party, Pierluigi Bersani.
What about Mario Monti? I'm sorry, but you both look like an old married couple who love each other, hate each other, and sometimes support each other. In the past, you supported Mr. Monti as European Commissioner. You have an up-and-down relationship.
No, there are no ups and downs. I knew Monti as a professor, respected by everyone. I put him forward. I nominated him with my government for European Commissioner. And then I supported his second mandate for another 4 years during D'Alema's government. And finally, when I was obliged to resign by this conspiracy, I thought about the President's proposal that Monti could set up a technical government and do well. Then the disappointment was complete.
Monti gets the Vatican's endorsement, which seems essential in Italy.
No, that's not true. It's not true.
But there were clear declarations in that direction. How can you win back the Catholic vote?
No, that's absolutely not true. There was only an article in a Catholic magazine that doesn't represent the Catholic world. And we have many relationships with that world.
But many statements lean that way. Monti is clearly the ideal candidate for Catholic voters.
There are a lot of declarations in the other direction. Many people appreciate what we have done in almost 10 years of government. Most of all about the defense of ethical values, of the individual, of life, of the family, and the freedom of teaching. all things that we consider our values. We are the backbone of an Italian Catholic party in that great family of democracy and freedom in Europe, which is the European People's Party.
But something in the relationship between you and the EPP has stopped working. Joseph Daul said that Mario Monti is the candidate for the EPP. What's the problem?
He denied saying that. Maybe he did say it, and that would be...
Do you think it's a personal point of view, or is it the expression of a common European feeling?
Absolutely personal. He's just one of the 14 vice presidents of the EPP. Maybe he has his own agenda. He speaks German better than French because he comes from Strasbourg. Obviously, he wants to please someone, just to get something back for his own career. I have to say I was very upset by these statements, but I repeat, they're statements that make no sense, that go against the Italian reality. There were many other statements about my attitude towards Europe. Let me take this opportunity to say that there's no Italian who's more pro-European than I am. Even before I got into politics, I shared the dream of Schuman, Adenauer and de Gasperi, a European Union as one whole entity like the USA.
When was the breaking point between you and the EU? There must have been a moment when something snapped. If Martin Schulz, the president of the EU Parliament, now clearly says that Berlusconi is a threat, not a source of stability, but a threat to Italy and Europe.
That's because I had a run-in with him during a session of the European Parliament when he said very unpleasant and groundless things about me, my government and my party.
Are all these statements just personal opinions? Schulz, Daul, even Juncker, they express themselves in such a way.
But you're not giving me very esteemed names in Europe.
The President of the European Parliament is not esteemed?
The President of the European Parliament is the product of negotiations between our political party and the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats named Schulz, and given that there was a pact to have us for half of the Parliament and then the Social Democrats for the other, we agreed. That does not mean that we hold Mr. Schulz in high esteem. I'll say this about Europe. When there was a universal decision, which I also strongly supported, to appoint a president of the Council of Heads of State and Governments of Europe, I proposed Tony Blair as the most influential candidate, the most charismatic, the most expert and respected around the world. It was the same thing with the appointment of High Commissioner Catherine Ashton. France and Germany, who wanted to keep control over foreign policy, said no to the appointment of Tony Blair, and so we had to appoint a person like Mr. Van Rompuy, totally unknown among Europeans. Personally, I'm friends with Van Rompuy.
Maybe it's because the Franco-German axis is decidedly more powerful than Italy in Europe.
But it goes against Europe as an important entity on the international scene that can export democracy and can play a decisive role on the international chessboard. It's not by keeping Europe the way it is currently, with national sovereignty jealously guarded by each country, that we can imagine a Europe that lives up to the dream of the Founding Fathers.
Why is Angela Merkel so unkind to you?
She's not unkind to me.
Then what is the problem with her?
She's someone I've always had cordial relations with. There's no problem. The only problem is that I have to defend Italy's interests, and given that Germany wants hegemony in Europe, I'd like it to be a hegemony of solidarity.
It could be that your sceptical statements about the euro provoke this mixed reaction of Europe towards your candidacy.
I have never been sceptical about the euro.
You have accused the euro of several evils, haven't you?
I've never said anything of the kind. I'm strongly convinced about how useful the euro single currency is, but I just say there has to be a global construction around this currency. A money that is not supported by a central bank is a weak money.
As a possible future minister of the Italian economy, what would your priority proposal be at the first European summit?
In all the European councils, I was the one who had experience and an above-average knowledge. All my colleagues were fine people, but some of them came from bureaucratic circles, others only from politics, others only had union experience. There was no one with my economic experience, someone like me, who for several decades was in the thick of the world of work and the market. I have in me the combined experience of the world of the market and of governing.
So figures such as Juncker, Olli Rehn, Barnier. Juncker, Olli Rehn, Barnier have no experience, in your opinion?
Juncker is also a doyen of these councils, but he expresses a very small country where he was elected with 58,000 votes. In consequence, his influence and his political dimension are not comparable to someone who represents a country of 60 million inhabitants. I've always had friendly relations with all of my colleagues seated around the same table at the European Council. But I definitely became a nuisance when I started to say no, or I used my veto to defend the interests of my own country without attacking others.
You don't feel a bit isolated in Europe?
Absolutely not. I keep in touch with my colleagues regularly, and I also have a special talent for respecting others and making myself appreciated. I'm a person who's very open to friendship, and if there's anyone who in 20 years of political life knew how to knit friendships with other leading political figures, that man is me.
The way Italy is seen abroad is not the same, it's quite different. The international media, and especially Europeans, don't much like it. Is this a view that has been deformed by a distance from the problem, or is it something else? Why do all the European media say the same thing about you?
I have to contradict you, because I've been to Prague, I've been in France, and everywhere people in the street recognize me.
We're not talking about being known, but being liked.
I've always had an extremely open, warm welcome from my entrepreneur colleagues, from my colleagues in the EPP. The media mostly lean to the left, and there's a link with the Italian media that's mostly aligned to the left. There's a sort of chain link, particularly with the Italian newspaper La Repubblica, that cultivates all these friendships, and this chain's deployed against me.
Is La Repubblica so powerful that it influences The Economist, Libération, Le Monde? Maybe you're giving it too much importance.
Yes, there is a circuit, and in this circuit they ask each other for help. They feed each other news. The same news is taken up. That is to say, I'll publish a piece, please pick it up, and it ends up as if it were the opinion of Libération. And this is something I always have to guard myself against.
So if you win the elections and you go to a European summit, do you think Angela Merkel will welcome you with open arms?
With Angela Merkel, I've always had a very good relationship. Just once, she and Sarkozy had an attitude that attacked my international credibility. And Mrs. Merkel asked me, "How come you're still speaking to me?"
Angela Merkel said that to you, and did you speak to each other after that?
Yes, of course, we continued to talk. I'm unable to hold a grudge. Sometimes I'm too good. I've never had problems with her. I had some difficulties with Sarkozy about another question. Because when I agreed with him, with France, about Mario Draghi's appointment as president of the ECB, Sarkozy asked in return that the Italian member of the board resign. Naturally, I accepted, but Bini Smaghi refused to resign, even though we offered him a lot of alternative options. He wanted to become the governor of the Bank of Italy. For us, for me, as Prime Minister, he didn't fit the role.
With Sarkozy, was there always a struggle for leadership? For example, about strategy in Libya. Sarkozy was in the forefront, while Italy, which played a role there historically, had a certain influence, didn't get better results. France was more efficient.
No, France followed its own interests.
Sarkozy, quando è andato in Libia,
When Sarkozy went to Libya and he saw enormous billboards showing me and Gaddafi as great friends, he went back home and told his men, "Italy's going to take all the Libyan oil and gas away from us. We have to do something." So he bombed the column that Gaddafi had sent to Benghazi, and he convinced the other countries to intervene. That night, I wanted to resign because there was undue interference from the international community in the problems of a country.
If you pointed out just one important person in your life, I'm not talking about your personal life, but your political life, someone from whom Silvio Berlusconi thinks he could still learn something.
From a political point of view, I've always looked to the leaders of the world powers. I've always had excellent relationships with the US presidents. I got to have a strong friendship with George Bush. I had good relations with Clinton, with his wife, Mrs. Clinton. I had good relations with Obama, who I admire as someone capable, with great common sense. I have a fraternal relationship with Vladimir Putin. I think that nowadays he's the best politician in the world. I think that Russia is enormously fortunate to have him as a leader.
Is he also misunderstood abroad?
Absolutely, yes. His image is exactly the opposite of what he is.
Just one personal question to conclude. Is there anything that keeps Silvio Berlusconi awake, stops him from sleeping? Is there something that haunts you as a politician?
As a politician, no. Being responsible for my country because of the trust many fellow citizens place in me, yes. Right now, the spiral of recession concerns me.
Grazie a lei.